Hey there, everybody. This is Bill Woodcock,
And I'm Steve Hunt.
and you are watching or listening to another edition of
But before we go,
that podcast that is by Gen X for everybody about Gen X and the crazy times we live before we go.
yeah,
So you were
I was,
saying, sir,
I was going to say, Bill, I think about the song Take a Walk on the Wild Side. That really tees up this episode well.
that it does. That it does. And as we tee it up, I'd like to remind you all to like and subscribe to this fine podcast on whatever platform through which you're listening, be it YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, or what have you. But Steve, we continue our summer series of podcast episodes. And one of the things that I know members of the younger generations, certainly several Gen Z members who I know, have been aghast at the concept of the fact that we Gen Xers were what was commonly called latchkey kids.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we were the people who were left alone all day without supervision, and we just didn't care that much.
Yeah.
So, Steve, the summer being that time of year when we were off from school, the days were long, the weather was warm, we could go about and move about and run about basically as we pleased. And what a fertile ground that laid for misadventure. Steve, please don't disappoint me. Tell me that as a child of Gen X, you had summer misadventures.
We had plenty of summer misadventures. And let me tell you, Bill, you talk about latchkey kids, and I just take you to my experience as a parent. We literally, until my oldest was in high school and my youngest at the same time was in middle school, because they're three grades apart, um, or at least they were. Um, we had a sitter literally for 2 hours a day. For the hour between the time my wife and I were both gone to work and the time the kids had to get off to school, and the hour and maybe 15 or 20 minutes from the time they got home from school to the time one parent got home. We had no such thing during the school year. I remember being very much on my own as like a 10 or 11-year old at home after school, and I had my own key, hence the term latchkey. Summer, though, forget having the hour or two to yourselves. You had the whole day. And this was, there was no Find My iPhone. There was no Life 360. There was no GPS to know where your child was at a particular time. There was none of that. The parents were at work, and you were left to your own devices from the time they went to work, which for my folks was sometime around 7 a.m., to the time the first parent got home, which was about 5 p.m. So that's a 10-hour block where the only hope that your parents had was that you'd still be alive when they got home. And we pretty much, at least I don't know about you, Bill, but in my household, we would give our parents an idea of what we were going to do. Like we had a friend that had a pool, so we were going to go over to their house for a little while to swim, or we were going to go down to the park and play ball, or kind of a vague sketch of where we might be at a particular point in time. But it never filled in the ton of blanks. And oh, by the way, we're out on our bikes all day. So that's the other hook. And the only thing we had to do was be home in time for dinner. Anything that happened during the day, and a lot happened during the day, it didn't matter. Um, and yes, I will tell you my most vivid memory, and I'm going to try to keep the story short because it's a bit of a story. But I had three brothers. We'd have these battles, and I don't know if you ever took the coat hangers, put a rubber band around them, and shot little wadded up pieces of paper at each other. Like it was almost like a slingshot. Like we would create these slingshots, fold up a tight piece of paper, a little wad, and fling them at each other at like 90 miles an hour. How nobody got hurt, I have no idea. We would have battles in the house, and we lived in a one-story house, a rambler. And so to sneak attack each other, we would climb out of windows and try to climb in the other window behind enemy lines. Well, one of the neighbors thought somebody was breaking into our house, and they called the cops. And the cops showed up. And thankfully, we were able to vouch and show, like, literally show pictures in the house. Look, here's a picture of us with our parents. And the cops left. So we thought we were good to go, no muss, no fuss. By the time my dad got home, 5 different neighbors had said, "Hey, the cops showed up at your house." And so my dad comes home. "So, boys, what'd y'all do today?" "Nothing." "Really? Nothing interesting happened?" "No, Dad, nothing happened, man. Nothing. We were just hanging out watching cartoons." "Are you sure about that, guys?" "Yeah, absolutely nothing happened." "Well, let's see. I talked to Mr. Harrison and Mr. Dyson, and he rounded them off, and we're like, shit, we're done." That was probably the biggest piece of mischief we got into, that we're climbing through windows and somebody was convinced our house was being broken into because all they saw these boys jumping in and out of windows, running around the house. So, mischief, oh yeah. Bill, how about you? I hope I did not disappoint with that
No,
story of
no. We can't. We
my
can't
big
talk
brother.
about me yet. We can't talk about me yet. No, I'm not done with this. What the hell? Ran through, ran through the house. What? Why? I mean, did your neighbors not know who you were?
It was the neighbors behind us who did not know who we were. So they had a view from their house and they just saw people climbing in. And to add to the story, so for this war game, we would build
Climbing in and
barricades.
out. Were
Huh?
you carrying out piece of household items? I mean, did at any point one of
No,
you carry out a TV?
no. It was just jumping in and out of windows. And so we would build these barricades because it was 2-on-2 battles. So we would take our beds and dressers, and of course we put all this shit back before our parents got home. But the sneak attack was you knew which window to climb into to get behind the barricade to surround the other team. And so, yeah, all this, and she was an elderly lady. All she saw were these boys jumping in and out of windows of this house. And so she just assumed that we were up to something.
See, I guess there's the place where I am on this. Crime doesn't work like that.
No,
Crime, crime works like you go in, you grab the shit, you get out. You
right.
don't go run from window to window, climbing in, climbing out,
Yeah.
facing each other. That just is not a thing. I'm not sure had I witnessed something like that, what I would have thought I was seeing. I'm not sure I would have thought it was crime, but I don't know. Probably some authority did need to be called to check it out. And the best part is that simply taking your word for it that you belong there wasn't enough. You had to demonstrate through photographic evidence that yes, you were part of that house. As if the police were looking to see that maybe the pictures were doctored.
Well, this was before IDs, and I don't think any of us had IDs at the time. 'Cause I don't think my oldest brother was not driving yet, so he didn't have a license. So none of us, and now your kids have state IDs by the time they're what 10 or something. We had nothing, and so when he knocks on the door, we let him in, and he kind of looks at us, and we look at him, and they're talking about a report. We're like, well, we live here. They're like, and they just kind of give us a look, and so my oldest brother, thankfully being the smart one, was like, look, there are pictures of us all over this house. We live here. We swear to God. And so,
Well, and
the
also, and
cops were like, well,
also
yeah,
that this was summer and there was, I mean, you said your parents were at work. There was no school office to call
nope,
this for the cops to say, "Oh, where do you go to school?" And then they could call and say, "Does so and so go to that school?"
Yeah.
There was no school to call.
Nope.
I presume there was no other civic authority to vouch for your identity and membership in the family. No church, nobody. You were shit out of luck.
You were, and it just you were just done. And
No,
thankfully,
you were.
they could have called my mom or dad at work, but I guess they just figured these guys, they're not. And I think the cop figured out what the neighbor did not. By the time the cop got there, I think we had taken a break from our fight, and we're in the living room sipping on beverages. So we casually open the door. We're not hauling out TVs and shit. So the cops, I think they were kind of bewildered because they hear about this robbery with these boys jumping in and out of windows, taking apparently stealing stuff. And my brother opens the door, the cop comes in, the other three of us are sitting in the living room with ice water and looking up like, what's up?
I think the cops were mostly pissed off that they had to deal with your nonsense.
Probably, although in those days in Fort Washington, Maryland, it might have been the most interesting thing they did all day.
Well,
and,
right.
and had a good laugh about it going back to the station. So, it might not have been so bad, but that was the type of thing, when you're left with 10 hours of idle time, stuff happens.
So I think we might have established in a prior episode that my family pretty much wanted me dead because they didn't really know what to do with me. Um,
They didn't know when you were
so
born, apparently.
pretty much. So so my father also for a lot of my childhood worked a night shift. So he worked 4 to 12. So he would sleep during the day because, of course, you know, after he got home from work was time for him to go carousing
Mm-hmm.
and then come home and have dinner and then, sleep from like 2 to 10 or 3 to 11. And
Mm-hmm.
then he would go out and run his errands and maybe do some afternoon carousing if some gal he was sweet on wasn't working. Um, and then go to work.
Mm-hmm.
So he wasn't home much. And
Right.
my grandmother and my great grandmother, they were happy to let me go out and about,
Mm-hmm.
ostensibly because it's a good way to go for Billy to go out and make friends. Except, wholesome, you know, Huckleberry Finn, Norman Rockwell, let's put baseball cards in the spokes of our bicycle
Mm-hmm.
wheels and go
Mm-hmm.
riding. That never happened. What would happen with our So two things are of note here. One would be there were a few times that I tore myself up. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I mean, there was a time that I spilled out on my bicycle on a cinder pavement,
Ugh.
on a cinder driveway, and I dug about an eighth of an inch deep gash into my left knee, which just bled profusely and had cinders in it and took about 3 weeks to maybe 4 weeks to heal.
Oh
And to
yeah.
this day, that scar is still purple because I'm sure there's still cinders in it.
Oh
You
yeah.
know, I mean, I took a piece of that driveway with me, and I was very happy to have done that. There were times that, I would ride my bike into hedges
Oh yeah.
and excite a hornet's nest,
Mm-hmm.
and wound up getting stung for my trouble, sometimes several times. There was a time that we decided to play Evil Knievel and somehow use a ramp that was about, I don't
Mm-hmm.
know, maybe a foot off the ground to
Yeah.
somehow use our bikes to jump over a neighbor's garden
Oh
where
yeah.
some of her flowers were like 5 and 6 feet tall. There was no way we were going to get over that. So, of course, who was the only person to attempt this jump? Me. And
Mhm.
what did I do? If you guessed, careen through the woman's garden and destroy it, you
Yes.
were right. Because that's exactly what I did. And then everybody else ran off and I got blamed. Very little accountability ever came from this.
Right.
One of my highlights was designing like a downhill, basically what would be now called bike cross or bicycle cross. I mean, I know people who do this shit now for recreation, but we did it before it was a thing. And I remember going down these bumps
Mhm.
because the neighbor had a yard that or a back piece of their property that was tilled over, but then they didn't wind up growing a garden, so it was just this tilled over ground. And
Mhm.
going over the bumps of the tilled over ground, and then me taking a header, literally flipping 360 in the air over the handlebars and landing spread eagle face first. And I just went whoomp into a big cake of mud in my face.
Oh yeah.
My face hit a big cake of mud that within seconds I realized was not a cake of mud. It,
Oh.
it was
Horses.
horse shit.
I was about to say, from based on where you've told me you've lived, horses.
Yes. And what did I do? I washed off
Yeah,
and went on to live another day.
absolutely.
But perhaps the worst thing that happened, and this happened several times, is on occasion, and this would mostly be myself, but sometimes it would be neighbors' kids, it would
Mhm.
be cousins of mine who were older. We, how do I say it? We came across meth labs.
Oh, hello.
I mean, these were literal meth labs or whatever labs they were. Maybe they weren't meth. Maybe it was PCP. Maybe it was something else. I don't know. But these were like little shacks that were built in the woods that were close enough to the edges of the woods that people could drive their cars up to the edges of the woods in these big fields that were as of yet undeveloped property and get their wares and get them to wherever they needed to be. And we would come across these places. And when we came across ones that were not occupied, which
Mhm.
means that sometimes we did, we would look in the window or even on occasion go inside, and there would be these chemistry setups
Oh my
that
god.
like later on when I was in college, I would understand to be distillation setups or crystallization setups or that sort of thing. But at the time I just thought it was cool. Here's the other thing, Steve. I had no idea it was drugs. I had
Oh,
no idea what it was I was even looking at. I just thought it was somebody doing chemistry out in the fucking woods for some reason. I had no idea. My cousins, who were at least like the older cousin I had, was 4 years older than me. They knew,
of course.
but and they were using vernacular and all that, and I'm just like, oh yeah, and I'm thinking about my chemistry set at home. I've never made drugs.
Well, I
Not the same thing. And I'm like wondering, like, well, how do I get like that early glass thing? How do I get like that oiler thing that you can put the flask in and make it bubble up and do stuff? What was wrong with me? And sometimes there would be people there,
well,
and they'd look and they'd be like, you kids get the fuck away. Hey kids, fuck you, get out of here. And I mean, they didn't look. Let me just say this: they were doing chemistry, but what was interesting to me was that they didn't look scholarly.
Hmm.
They were like bone thin, scraggly hair. Amazingly, drugged out freaks looked the same in the '70s as they do today.
Wow.
And oh my God, what did I think of these? I don't know what I thought.
You thought it was the coolest chemistry set ever.
I mean, you were able to go into the woods and build a shed and do chemistry.
Yeah. That's crazy. And probably many moons ago, that same plot was probably used for like stills. Back in the 30s, the prohibition days. But a lot to unpack there, Bill. Number one, this definitely was from our childhood because if it were today and you stumbled across a drug manufacturing plant, you'd probably get shot. And the fact that these guys just like, oh, it's just a bunch of kids, who cruised through the woods, they stumbled upon us. Yeah, get out of here. So the fact that you got off with a get out of here, that is truly back in our day because I don't think that shit happens today. Number two, go. Bill, you're on mute, bro.
I muted myself because I'm aghast. But before, I mean, but yeah, I mean, before you go to number two, I mean, yeah, I mean, nobody wanted like killing like a bunch of kids on their conscience, which was nice.
Well, they wouldn't have worried about that today. It just would have been whatever. But the second thing I will tell you is for those who are not Gen Xers who either don't get the reference or don't understand how big this guy was back in our childhood days, Evil Knievel was that dude. Okay. He was the guy who tried to go across the Grand Canyon in a rocket and failed. He jumped all kinds of shit. He was a daredevil. He was like this massive daredevil who tried all these crazy jumps. And we did not do, me and my friends, something as radical as try to go over, 6 foot gardens or whatever the heck you got in your head was a good idea. But who amongst us did not try to do some Evil Knievel type stuff? Yes, before skate parks and all the ramps and all that stuff, we built our own ramps. We'd go behind our neighborhood where there's some construction going on. You probably found a few bricks. You found a block, a couple of pieces of wood, and you would try on your bike to go downhill and go from one ramp to the other. Now, ours, like I said, we did not try to go over stuff like you did, Bill. But that was the good news. The bad news is we tried this shit in the street. So in my neighborhood, there were a couple of downhills. So you would go downhill, get some speed up, and the ramps were a few feet apart. And there were a lot of wipeouts. And I will tell you, our street that I lived on was called Mary Place. And yes, I took a few chunks of Mary Place myself with a couple of wipeouts, trying to go from one ramp to the other, thinking that we are Evil Knievel. Because again, who amongst us did not try some crazy shit to be like evil? So, for the non-Gen Xers, you just understand how big this guy was. And if you were a young, crazy, wacky kid, oh yeah, you wanted to try some of that extreme shit.
At some point, we're going to do a separate episode all about Evil Knievel
Yeah.
because everything you said, 100%. And I fucking idolized Evil
Oh,
Knievel.
who
I
did?
thought he was the stuff. I
Yeah.
mean, jumping over school buses in Wembley Stadium and whatnot, with a big old Harley Davidson and wearing a big white jumpsuit with the American flag colors all over it. My bike when I was growing up was the Huffy Thunder Road, which was white with blue and with blue stripes
Hmm.
and white stars in it and red racing stripes on it. It looked like a
Hmm.
mini bike of Evil Knievel. And had this been a later time, Evil probably would have sued them for copyright infringement
Oh yeah.
because it looked just like something he would have. And and yes, of course, I fancied myself Evil Knievel. If there was a damn little stream in the woods,
Yep.
I
You
had to jump it
Yep.
or find some way to go through it.
Yep.
And I mean, I talk about the wipeouts and the horrific things. And there were some times where I was like the shit. I was happy that I could like do all that stuff, you know? I learned how to jump up on my bike and pull my bike up and let it
Yep.
go through the air.
Hell yeah.
That was badass. So,
Absolutely.
yes, I wanted to do shit just like Evil Knievel, except I knew that I was never going to break all those bones like he did.
Yeah.
I don't think I ever broke a bone,
Mhm.
but I've got some scars and I'm still sore in some places every now and then that make me remember some of those times.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And you're right. Your point about, because I learned the same trick with the bike, how you could just like raise it up and jump stuff. If there was a puddle, you try to jump it. The other thing is, if you were going from street and there was a curb, you try to jump up onto the curb without having to, you know, stop your bike and go up over the curb. Or there'd be driveway where you could just smoothly do it. But no, 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 no. You had to do the jump over the curb, and all of that was evil Knievel. You because jumping shit is what you wanted to do. So absolutely. And speaking of bikes, I don't know how many miles I put on my bike every summer. But again, that was the mode of transportation. I don't know about your dad, but my mom and dad shared a car. My dad carpooled in with some neighbors. My mom worked downtown DC, so she drove in. That's all we had. So there was no pick up at this or pick up at this person's house or dad, can you drive me up? No, 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 no. You whipped out your bike and you biked to wherever it was you were going. And you would go several places during the day. And you know, if you had multiple things going, you were going to like go to the ball field, you hauled your shit with you. And if you were on going somewhere else, you kept that with you all day. And that's how you got around was by bike. If you were lucky, if you weren't lucky, you just walked. But that's how it rolled. And again, you would tell your mom you're going over to the next neighborhood over to go swimming. If you pit stop for an hour hanging outside of the 7-Eleven, oh well, so be it. The only rule was again, you're home by dinner time. That's it. That's all. And there
Well,
were no check-ins. Like if I don't know about you, Bill, but if I went over to somebody's house, there was no, well, are their parents home? You knew the parents weren't home because they were working too. So you were at their house with no parental guidance, maybe an older brother or sister who was probably not even paying attention to you. Um, I won't even tell you stories at the pool that we would go to, and the older guys and gals at the pool, while the younger ones were told, "Yeah, y'all just swim, y'all just go swimming, and let us know if you need something to drink." Um, so
yeah.
there was
So
none of that.
I think we've established that you lived in a little bit more developed environment than I
Yes,
lived in. I lived in a
yes,
little bit more of a countrified place. And I will say this, there was a myth that went on during our summers, and the myth was of a meal called lunch, because that hardly ever happened.
yeah,
I mean, you better have had your fill of your Rice Krispies and toast and juice and whatever else made up an important part of this nutritious breakfast. You better have that shit reconciled by 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning, because when
right.
you had it out, you weren't eating until 8 o'clock at night, and you just knew that was the way life was going to be. And
Hmm.
then you would go home and have your fish sticks and your peas, and
Right.
then that's what you did. Um, you know, didn't really have many places to light, didn't have many other places to go to and hang out. There were one or two,
Hmm.
where people would take pity on us and take us in, but mostly it was purely on your own time, because a lot of other parents, yes, they worked, and, there were again some older folks who were around who didn't exactly take too kindly about that real tall, thin kid,
Uh huh.
riding around on his bike. And, why doesn't his family take care of him?
Right.
So that was a thing. And then, you talk about, it's interesting that you talk about, going to different places like the 7-Eleven or the swim club. There was Watermont Swim Club, which was near me in Elkridge. It still exists to this day.
Hmm.
Um, I used to try to I tried to break into there more times than Corporal Klinger tried to get out of the army. I mean, that never worked. I mean, there were times I would try to climb fences to get into this damn joint. What was I going to do there? I don't know. Swim, even though I had like no swim trunks, go in there and say, hey, how's it going? Maybe have a soda. But there was like, it was just basically a thing to do. I think maybe the biggest thing was to say that I got in,
Right.
was to say that I broke in.
Hmm.
And at almost 57 years old, or 50, actually, no, now I am 57 years old. I, I I've never been inside Watermont Swim Club. And I mean, I could, as a grown-up adult, I could do that now. I could drive there and walk in.
Right.
I don't want to.
Right. That's funny.
So Steve, we only have a couple minutes left. What I mean, what else? I'm a little bit interested because you actually had like places for civilized people. You didn't
Right.
walk around like a feral creature. You didn't walk around like one of the child cavemen in Cord 10,000 BC, the
Uh-huh.
great Saturday morning live action cartoon from our youth. I mean, you talk about a 7-Eleven. To me, if you said a 7-Eleven, that's like going to a damn foreign country. I mean, there's air conditioning in 7-Elevens. It was all cold. And there were Slurpees. We didn't talk about Slurpees on the last episode, by the way.
That's true. Yeah, that how we missed that icy concoction. I have no idea, but yeah, absolutely.
Maybe
How do
because
we
a
miss
lot of
that
time
one?
they suck. Because the
Oh
fucking
yeah,
machine was always out.
there is that. But I will tell you, if
What
it
other
was right,
civilized places did you go to? I'm intrigued.
well, mostly it was other people's houses because so the area I grew up in southern Prince George's County was it was being developed and expanding in the 70s. So actually we had the best of multiple worlds. Um we still had farmland. We still had um wooded areas, and we did the whole bike thing that you did. So we had some of that. In fact, to get from one area to the other, a lot of times we'd go through a wooded area to get there. Uh, and there's also farmland which we would go through on purpose because we knew that the farmer there would want to like shoot people, and we try to see if we get away with getting through the land without getting shot at. So there was still some country elements remaining, but you're right. There's a lot of developed areas. We had a couple of neighbors or people in the area. I will say nobody in my neighborhood, but a couple of people in the area that had pools, and we thought they were hot shit because my God, they had pools. Um, so there were more civilized areas. It was probably a little under a mile to the high school, so you could always get to the high school and romp around the field or the courts there. So yeah, we had a lot to keep us busy. We also had a lot of kids. Like we had enough kids on my street that we could get up a decent game of baseball. Maybe not 9-on-9, but we could certainly get up a good, a 6-on-6 or 7-on-7. Same thing with football. We could play 5 or 6 aside. So that was the other thing that we had. Obviously, you didn't have being so spread apart was kids. So we had places to go and a butt ton of kids. So yeah, it we and so those 10 hours went quick. I mean, we would look up and it's like, oh shit, it's time to head home because it's almost dinner time. So and
Wow,
sometimes we
how
would not be
how
there in
how
time for
all
that.
American was your upbringing?
It was
It really, I mean, to me,
it was
it
pretty
sounds
classic.
it sounds awesome and disgusting at the same time.
It does, although The only thing that makes it awesome, more awesome and less disgusting is it was completely unsupervised. It was pretty much, you know, a bunch of kids left to their own devices. And the only thing that you had to do is make sure that whatever house you were at, you didn't wreck shit. If you left it in one piece, you could go back. If something got broke, that house was off limits because the parents were like, "Y'all ain't coming up in here no more." So yeah, there were no camera systems or alarm systems to find out who's coming and going. Yeah, it was pretty wide open, and
And
that's the
that
part
and
that's
that
awesome is
and that
again
is and
10
that is the
hours
fun.
10 hours all to yourself. And there were some days I just felt like going bike riding, probably like you where you live, and I would just bike for hours by myself at 10 or 11 years old. Any thought or threat that a white unmarked van would pull up and snatch me and take me off forever and a day? Nah, no concern.
I mean, I mean, of course, I mean, I don't think it's a secret, but we live in the same kind of general area for those
Yeah.
viewers and listeners. But I mean, I can remember riding in trails on the woods literally for miles
Hmm.
and coming out into neighborhoods and communities now. I mean, from Elkridge down to like now what's, this doesn't mean anything to others, but Steve Jessup.
Mm.
I mean, I used to ride down to Jessup. I used to ride down to Savage. Used to ride down to like, you know, East Columbia now, like 32. Before
Hmm.
Maryland Route 100 was in there, it was anything goes. I mean, I mean, and folks, I mean, I'm talking about 5 to 10 mile area. And then
Hmm.
if you went to the north, well, that was a little bit trickier, but you can get yourself all the way to the Patapsco River, which
Uh-huh.
is another 5 miles. And and hell, if you were so enterprising, and I only did this once or twice, you can cross the river and go into a whole other county. I mean that, but that would be more of a day trip, but oh my God,
Yeah.
and then all of that with no regard for personal safety
No.
or survival, to be quite honest.
Yeah, because you probably had no ID on you, no way for anybody to call anybody if something happened to you. You were just out there, left to your own devices. And again, the amount of freedom we had is, I think about it now, and I'm like, there's no way I would let my kids do that ever. But we were just like, it wasn't even permission. Like, again, for us, the parents would be like before they head off to work. So what are y'all going to be doing today? Or we always slept in. So it was like, what are y'all going to be doing tomorrow? Well, we might do this and this and this. And we're thinking about this and this. Oh, okay. And that was it. There was no precise instruction of where you were going to be every hour of the day. There was
Yeah,
no, hey, check in when you get over to
yeah.
Ham's house. Nope.
Take no, take money for the payphone in case something happens and you need to call one of us. No.
No, not even that. Not even a couple of emergency quarters. I might have some money in my pocket because I'm on my long bike ride and I want to stop by the store and grab a drink, but that was about it. If there was an emergency, there was no whip out the iPhone and hit your in case of emergency contact person. Hopefully somebody came upon you before you bled out. like you when you like totally wiped out. So yeah,
I never thought I could have bled out, but I could have.
unbelievable the things that we were able to do. But again, we did it all year. It was just in the summertime, you had an entire day of it. But probably like you, Bill, before school, you probably had a block of time where you were on your own to get to the stop or whatever because everybody was gone. After school, you probably had a block of time where you had to fill it in, whether it's doing homework or maybe you had practice or something because there was nobody home. That's
Right.
just how it was, and I am oftentimes shocked that we're still here in one piece.
And I think better for the experience.
I
And
I
with that, and with that, we close this episode. We have to revisit this topic of summertime shenanigans at some point. I
and
love
Evil
this.
Knievel, and Evil Knievel, because
Oh, for sure, Evil Knievel,
I just don't think people
racist,
really get
hateful
it.
bastard that he was.
Yes, he
But
yeah, that was shocking when when you find out later, man, this guy who I was trying to be like is somebody who wouldn't want me around at
was
all.
was was a pretty not a good person,
Yeah,
right?
he was evil.
Anyway, I'm Steve. I'm Bill. You have been watching or listening to another episode of But Before We Go, feel free to join us next time. Take care, everybody.